So we move to chapter 16, compounding and discounting. Let's take a look at the first area, which really concerns something that you'll be familiar with, whether or not you looked in detail through the Study Hub chapter, simple interest and indeed compound interest. What do we mean by simple interest and indeed its calculation? Well, really what we're talking about really is the idea that we have some sort of principal amount, a capital sum, and we're simply trying to work out what the interest would be at a given nominal rate over a period of years, let's say. So the formula we see is S for the interest in dollars is times the principal times the nominal interest rate times the period. So pretty straightforward. Now let's note that the formula for the future value, if we're talking about multiple periods, is pretty straightforward too. Really, the future value is just going to be the principal amount times open bracket 1 plus R times N, with R and N as before, rate of interest and indeed number of years, close bracket. So do note that in terms of using this formula, the beginning of the first year is usually known as year 0, end of the first year, N is equal to 1. So note that 12-month time lag. Okay, so that's simple interest. What about compound interest? What do we mean by that? Well, pretty simply, we're talking about interests calculated based on the principal plus the interest earned every year. Note the difference. So we're rolling up the interest each year and indeed adding in the principal. So in terms of the formula, again, pretty straightforward. We're simply saying interest is equal to principal times R times N with the various elements as we described earlier on. Now, in terms of the formula to calculate the future value, note this formula here. So future value, again, quite straightforward. We're simply talking about principal times open bracket 1 plus I. The nominal interest rate being I, close bracket, times N, the number of compounding periods. So again, practice makes perfect here. Pretty straightforward. Once you get up to speed on it, we shouldn't get these types of questions wrong. Let's move into section 2 now, nominal and effective interest rates. And this is very examinable. Let's look at nominal first. But when we think nominal interest rates, we're really talking about the idea of a stated interest rate without compounding in any way, shape or form. So for example, an investment may quote an interest rate of 10% per annum compounded daily, nominal interest rate 10% per year, as is the case here. 5% per annum compounded daily, 5%, 12% compounded monthly, 12% per year. Okay, now what's different to that is the effective annual rate, the EAR. What do we mean by that? Note that what we mean here, and this is a little bit more useful than what we saw before, is we're changing the nominal interest rate and its compounding frequency into an equivalent yearly rate that can calculate the interest received in the year. So in effect, what we're doing with the effective annual interest rate formula is turning a sort of a compounding period or periods in effect into the equivalent of an annual yearly rate. Okay, so what does that do and why should we bother? Well, this would allow us for easier comparison between compounding periods. We could have one calculation based on, let's say, 10 period, one calculation based on 7. This would allow us to compare the effective annual rate. Okay, so in terms of the formula, here we have it. Effective rate, open bracket 1 plus I, where I is R over N times N minus 1. Okay, so really what we're talking about is the power of. Okay, so fairly straightforward. Just a quick reminder, the future value of a loan or investment with compounding is as follows as we saw up top. So let's stop there for a second. Quite a few formulas. Some of them may appear a little bit fiddly or unusual to you. The key, as I've said elsewhere, is just to practice. Now, what about compounding and discounting? So if we're talking about compounding, we're really talking about the future value of investments. So in effect, if we're looking at the future value of investments, it's sort of the same as the future value of a deposit. We're really saying, okay, we've invested in X, Y, Z, let's say a unit trust. That's the same as investing in a bank, but in a slightly different way. So an example there, if we're investing in a machine, let's say a baker for 3 years, cash earned from selling cakes in the year would be used to continue to make cakes into the future. So we're really compounding, aren't we, into the future. So in terms of the formula, again, quite straightforward, future value, just the principle, 1 plus I to the power of n. Outside of that, when we think of present value, this is more relevant now to not just to the MA exam, although we'll see all of the formulas that we've seen so far tested. Sort of going forward in your ACCA studies, you're going to see PV, or present value, or what is sometimes referred to as net present value, i.e. the idea of discounting future cash flows. And obviously, discounting, bringing cash flows from the future back to today's value is sort of the reverse of compounding, isn't it? In other words, having a principal sum and looking to compound that over the course of time. So in essence, we're talking about the time value of money, aren't we? We're saying that if you're discounting, you're trying to allow for the reduction in the time value of money. So certainly, a bird in the hand is worth two in the bush. Cash inflow available immediately is more valuable than cash inflow in the future for several different reasons. The first one is, if we have cash now, we can make investments. Outside of that, maybe future cash inflows are uncertain. We don't know if they will happen or won't. Outside of that, the obvious one, inflation, the idea that prices rise, so having $1 now is certainly better than having $1 in 5 years' time. So there's the sort of theory behind discounting, as it were. Now, in terms of the present value formula, again, pretty similar to what we saw above, PV is equal to FV divided by 1 plus I to the power of n. Okay, so really what we're doing is just rejigging the formula that we saw up top. Now, do remember that this area of net present value or present value is very important to you. Not just in the MA exam, but going forward. We've got to get a fix on it, okay? Now, we saw up top that we'd have to use some sort of discount rate. If we're discounting or looking to find the present value of future cash inflows, we need to use a rate. So the rate is going to be, obviously, an interest rate of some way, shape, or form. But, which particular interest rate? Well, that's open to subjectivity. At the end of the day, the higher the rate, the higher the discount, so the lower the present value, as it were. So in terms of the formula, it's really the present value is equal to the future value, let's say at T4 or in year 4, times the discount factor. So the discount factor, note, we can take from the present value tables. Now, I've given you a link to the tables here. This is available to you in the exam. Let me just open this up for you. Now, the tables are quite straightforward, to be honest, and they'll be relevant when we come on to perpetuities and indeed annuities. But you'll see here that we have the formula, and we have, obviously, a series of periods down the left-hand side, and a series of relevant percentage rates. And all we'd be looking to do is to obviously choose the period, choose the relevant rate, and get the discount factor. So not complicated at all. And just while we're here, if we look down below, you'll see the annuity table, again with the formula. This won't make sense now, but we'll be seeing that in a moment once we get on to annuities and indeed perpetuities. Again, works in exactly the same way. So not overly complicated at all. Let's get back into the mind map. So where we were was this area of saying, okay, well, we want to discount some future cash flows. What do we do? Well, if we want the present value, take the future value and multiply it by the discount factor. Where do I find the discount factor? In the tables, as I've just said. Okay. So moving from there, this area of section 4, annuities and perpetuities. Now, don't be alarmed by this area, because this is just really an add-on to what we've just said. Let me explain. The first area, a perpetuity. what do we mean by a perpetuity? Let's define it. Well, basically, a consistent cash flow every period till infinity. In other words, a cash flow forever. So an example might be $100 every year forever. Okay? Now, how do we discount a perpetuity? It's actually quite straightforward. You might think that it's complicated, but it's not. So if we said, okay, the discount factor for a perpetuity starting in year one is as follows. Simple as that. What you have is just 1 divided by the discount rate. So in effect, the PV, or present value, is just simply the annual cash flow. So I'm going to receive $100 forever into infinity. To simply multiply it by 1 divided by the interest rate. That's it. It's as simple as that. No excuse for getting this wrong. Okay? So that's a perpetuity. What about an annuity? Well, similar but just slightly different. What we mean by that is a consistent cash flow every period for several periods. Let's say 5 years, for 10 years, etc. So an example might be an annuity could be receive $100 every year for 10 years. Okay? So what about the discount factor? Again, pretty straightforward. Here we have it. The annuity factor, or in effect the discount factor, is equal to, open bracket, 1 minus, open bracket again, 1 plus I to the power of minus n divided by I. Okay? So I being the discount rate and the number of annuity periods. So not overly complicated, and the more practice we do, the better we get. So moving from there, let's say that we're trying to calculate the present value of an annuity or a perpetuity not starting on year one. Well, let's start with year one. Let's say that we were starting at year one. Pretty straightforward in one sense, and you can see the formula here. When we say AF, we're looking at the annuity factor. Okay? So the present value, of a perpetuity annual cash flow divided by I plus annual cash inflow. Okay? Now, in terms of an annuity, annual cash inflow times annuity factor to the power of n minus 1 plus to n minus 1 plus 1. Okay? So you'll see the explanation here. So just be careful. I couldn't get small n's here to show to the power minus 1. So that makes it slightly unusual when you look at the formula. Okay? So that is really starting year 0. What about starting after year 1? Same sort of thing for a perpetuity. We've got several options here. Note the AF being obviously the annuity factor. Just be careful with the formulas. It can be a little bit confusing. And note that there are several options here. Now, the only way to get savvy or to get familiar with this is to choose a particular option, the one that suits you, and just to put it into practice. But do note the difference between, perpetuities or annuities starting year 0 and indeed year 1. Obviously, we have to allow for, that period between year 0 and indeed the starting point. Just be careful with that. Okay? So that concludes this chapter 16 on compounding and discounting. A little bit tricky towards the end, I would admit, but again, practice makes perfect. We've just got to work the questions. I hope that your studies are going well, indeed. Okay.